Welcome to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is John Lefkowits, who's an author and psychologist in Maryland, and he's been helping families for almost 20 years now. Thanks so much for being here, John.
Oh, sure. My pleasure, Regina.
So the first question I have is, you just got certified in this Gottman method for couples, right? Mm-hmm. So hopefully by now, we've covered this a little bit in the past about Gottman's approach with the 7 principles for making marriage work, which is such a great book. So maybe you can explain a little bit more about how you apply his method.
Sure. Let me first clarify that I've completed my first stage of my Gottman training, but I'm not yet a Gottman certified therapist, but I am on my way to completing that. It takes a number of years.
Really?
Yes,
wow.
to go through all the stages.
Okay.
But that being said, I've worked in a number of different models in approaching marriage therapy over the nearly 20 years I've been in practice, and I found that the Gottman method is really the most effective one because of its evidence base and strong research background that drives the interventions and understanding of what's going on between a couple. So to your point, yes, that's one of his seminal works, The 7 Principles of What Makes Marriage Work. And his most recent book is called What Makes Love Last.
Okay.
And that book is essentially based on the concept of the sound relationship house. And it's a great model that I like working with couples, because with the sound relationship house, essentially there's 3 levels to it. And the foundation of the house is about building friendship and affection.
Okay.
The middle level is about how a couple manages conflict. And the highest level of the house is about developing shared dreams and meaning in the context of your relationship. And there's 2 pillars that go along the side of the house. One is trust and one is commitment.
So there are other approaches, right?
Yes.
Like the imago therapy.
Yes.
So how do you know how would a person know which model is going to best fit them? If they're saying, what, I really want to go see a counselor, how would they make that determination?
Yeah. Well, sure. There's an imago-oriented approach to marriage therapy. There's a what's called EFT, emotionally focused therapy, and there's even a psychodynamic object relations approach to marriage therapy. I would say, every couple, every circumstance is a little different, and probably what's most important for a couple is probably less emphasis on the specific method that someone most incorporates into their work with a couple, and more important, the goodness of fit, if you will, the
between
level
the therapist and the patient.
Exactly, the level of comfort you have when you consult with someone. That's why I often advise people that have an initial consultation with at least 2 different clinicians, and just decide after that with whom you're most comfortable.
Okay. So when you meet with a couple, do you first give them an explanation of this is how the Gottman approach works?
Yes, I provide, general overview, and what's nice about the Gottman approach versus the other approaches is there's a fairly in-depth assessment that you do. And actually, after the initial meeting in a PDF format, I send there's about 15 to 20 very brief one-page questionnaires. I know it can be a little overwhelming. Sometimes people need some time with that. But I find people generally enjoy filling out the questionnaires because it really requires them to think perhaps in some different ways and in depth about their relationship and their experience together. And they fill these out completely. I insist that it's confidential and that they send it back to me separately. So each person, husband, wife, works on their questionnaire separately, sends it back to me separately. I review the questionnaires, I interpret them, and then I have a summary form I use, and I provide feedback to the couple. And this helps me better understand sort of where we need to start in terms of building a sound relationship house and what the most pressing or outstanding issues might be, because there are dozens of techniques you can implement in working within a Gottman's method approach.
So when you're looking at the questionnaire answers, right? Are you screening to see where there's chinks in the foundation?
Sure, yeah. So sometimes what you're looking for both how an individual responded to the questions and what that might mean for either person in the relationship. And then you're looking at to what degree there's consistency between the two partners or where there may be large differences. Because sometimes, even if partner A's question, a couple of the questionnaires look promising, there are significant differences between theirs and their partners, that's an area you may need to look at with them.
Okay. So, is the focus usually by the time people come to you, there's already problems and you're trying to figure out how to fix them, or do perfectly healthy couples go to try and improve their relationship more than it already is?
Yeah, I think it's both, but
Okay.
Unfortunately, I would say at least 2/3 to 3/4 of couples I see are in crisis. There's been some type of infidelity, there's been some major upheaval in the family, and as a result, they're coming in a crisis. And typically, to get to that crisis point, there have been many years of difficulties and challenges that have not been adequately addressed by the couple that has sort of allowed them to get to that point. On occasion, I do see a couple either in a premarital context or early in the relationship, or just they're beginning to see some signs that they're not feeling as connected with each other, where they will come in and they say, hey, things are largely pretty good between us, but we just feel we need to work on these couple issues before they become, more problematic between us.
That would seem a lot easier to deal with.
It typically is
Yeah.
easier and better from a prognostic perspective as far as, the likelihood that the treatment will be helpful and worthwhile and help them kind of reestablish a more solid, trusting, loving, joyful connection with each other.
So when you're in session, are people basically just using you as a mediator, and it's well, here's my side of what the issue is, and the other person gives their side, and you're trying to help them sort of find some common ground, some compromise? Or, I can see it sort of derailing. I can see people using you as sort of being this arbitrator who's going to say, actually, she's right, you're in the wrong, shame on you, you need to go do X, Y, and Z to now make this right.
Well, indeed, yeah, a lot of people do look toward me like I'm the judge, or I determine what should or shouldn't happen, who's right, who's wrong, and that's despite the gray hair, that's not my role. Because couples therapy, marriage therapy, should be dyadic. In other words, it should be between the partners, between the husband and wife. And my role is to help better facilitate that dialogue between the couple by giving them tools, techniques, strategies that enhance their ability to communicate effectively with one another.
Okay. So going to Gottman's book that I rely on all the time, right? When you see, if people are rehashing an argument, right, and you're like, wow, you're going global, you're all the four dark horsemen, right? You're being sarcastic, you're stonewalling. Right? Do you weigh in and say what's going on?
Yeah. So sometimes I will talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse,
Right.
which is a wonderful metaphor
It is.
that has to do with criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness, and talk about certainly how when you're seeing those horsemen of the apocalypse, that is problematic in the relationship, particularly contempt. Because when we see contempt between people, really kind of a biting sarcasm or personal assaults against each other, that's probably, unfortunately, the best indicator of a negative outcome for the relationship. So sure, yeah, so I will often provide information or education about some of these issues as they relate to the relationship, and then provide a couple with other strategies they can use to address what's troubling them.
Okay. That makes sense.
Sure. So one of the great techniques is called is a 5-step technique for the aftermath of an argument.
Okay.
And actually, what's nice is I provide a couple with a booklet that gives them the 5 steps they can use.
So here's the funny thing about like what I notice. I'm sure you see it too. Like in when couples are arguing in mediation, and obviously in the setting I see them is post. They're getting divorced, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but or we're dealing with post-divorce issues. But you can see the dynamic, and you can see like, oh my God, if you just said this slightly differently, they would have a completely different reaction,
yes.
right? And words matter a lot to some people, and sometimes actions matter to others. And I find that, some people they want to have the argument and get it over with. That's more me, right? Like I'm gonna yell. If I'm pissed, I'm gonna yell. I'm gonna get it out.
Right.
But then I'm done, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, if somebody else needs to, take a break, kind of get it, needs time to themselves, and then they want to come back. Well, that whole time I'm just seething, and I'm like building my argument, and I'm going to annihilate you when you come back. So do you see how that could be a problem with two people? I see it all the time. People have very
yes.
different conflict styles.
Yes, and that's a great point, Regina. So part of now, whether it's, of course, as you point out, mediation post separation or establishing a separation toward a divorce versus something reparative and healing, which hopefully marital therapy is, are different, much different undertakings. However, what's similar is, yes, people have different conflict styles, but when one person gets flooded, which you can measure by when somebody's heart rate goes beyond 100 beats when their pulse is more than 100 beats per minute, their cognitive functioning will be significantly impaired.
Right.
And there's actually actual devices you can use to have people measure this during couples therapy. Yes,
wow.
there are, because the data is very clear about this. Once someone gets above 100 beats per minute, the argument is just going to be damaging to the relationship.
Huh.
And so that's where a lot of therapists will say, well, everybody always has the right to ask for a timeout.
Okay.
But that's, again, pretty vague.
Right.
And what we need to do is establish, well, what does a timeout mean? And how do you manage yourself during the timeout? And for what length of time? So as you're pointing out, Regina, so if someone's using that timeout to strengthen their arguments and become more agitated, like, oh, now I've come up with 3 more things I can slam them with, that's not going to be a good use of the time.
Right.
So, and interesting data shows you need a minimum of 20 minutes for that
really?
timeout. Yes. And there are
But the point is to calm down during those 20 minutes.
Precisely.
Okay.
And specific techniques we go through to achieve that.
Really?
Yes.
Huh. Maybe I should sign up for that.
Perhaps.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a short break, and then we will be right back.
For you. Hey, Mom.
Girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Welcome back to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is John Lefkowits, who's been helping families for over 20 years with family therapy. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Regina.
So, I'm going to switch from helping couples stay together to the sad part where we deal with half the time it's couples that don't stay together and they're going through a divorce. Yeah. So I've mentioned this before, but not everybody maybe understands what a collaborative divorce is. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Well, collaborative divorce is a non-adversarial, transparent, child-focused process that uses a team approach that allows for a mutual, durable agreement between the parties.
And so in the team, you have the 2 lawyers,
yes.
1 for each client, and then maybe 1 or 2 mental health professionals, right?
Correct.
To help the parties through the emotional part of the divorce.
Yes.
And you may even bring on a child specialist and a financial expert to help come up with a solution for the whole divorce process?
Yes, typically, as you point out, always both parties have their own collaboratively trained lawyer,
Right.
and then almost oftentimes there's a financial neutral who, as you know, sorts through the financial piece of the marital assets and liabilities, so that couples can have a clearer perspective on the specific decisions they need to make with clearly informed information. And then usually there's one or two divorce coaches, and so what that means is either there's one divorce coach, and I'm a psychologist, but any licensed mental health professional who's had the training can work in this capacity. And typically in higher conflict, more complex cases, there's usually a coach for both the husband and wife. In situations where the conflict is more modest or not as extreme, oftentimes there's just one coach where you serve more as a neutral and more of a facilitating role. And then occasionally, in some of these more complex cases where husband and wife may actively disagree about the needs or interests of the children, sometimes you will have a child specialist who can serve as the voice of the children. Again, he's not making any decisions, but is providing information to the team about these are who these children are, these are their strengths and challenges. And oftentimes, that information is most helpful to the coach or coaches who often help the parents develop a parenting plan.
Right. So do you see sometimes the dysfunctional dynamic that's been created over the last 10 or 20 years in a family when you're helping them with these parenting plans?
Oh, absolutely. There's, all kinds of dynamics typically you see when a couple has chosen to end the marriage. And as you point out, it's often, obviously they wouldn't be getting divorced if there weren't, some very serious problems between them. And oftentimes, part of the value of a coach is that, I help someone better understand the experience of the marriage ending, help to normalize the experience, help them deal with the stress associated with a recent separation or going through a divorce. And also sometimes there's a mourning or bereavement process with the ending of a marriage and family. So that's one piece the coach plays. And then another piece is helping in the relationship, because particularly if there's minor children, there's going to be an ongoing relationship, whether you like it or not.
Right.
Between the parents. So helping someone both understand their own hotspots or triggers that may make it difficult for them to be effective in how they manage issues or difficulties between themselves and their spouse. And then also as a coach, you help with the team, the process of the team, help facilitate what happens as a member of the team. Because for myself, I have expertise in groups and group process and group theory. So it's very helpful to have that background and understanding how groups function and how to maximize the effectiveness of our team in assisting this couple get to a mutual, durable agreement for their divorce.
No, I love the fact as an attorney that I can call the divorce coach in a collaborative case and say, what's going on with my client? Because normally I don't have that kind of relationship. I have clients that are in therapy, but there's confidentiality issues. That person never wants to come into court to testify, and so they're very reluctant to really be involved in the legal process. So it's very, very different than when we're signing, waivers that we're saying like, hey, we are a team. There's not the same level of confidentiality, but there's also protection because we all know that if the case falls apart, none of what we do can be used in court. None of us are going to be called in to testify. I can't continue with the case. You can't either. So we all have this sort of protected interest in working together. And you guys are fantastic. Sometimes clients don't tell me, like, I haven't called you back because my mom died. Well, that's good to know. Or like, I haven't called you back because I got fired. So sometimes they'll say things to you that I I'm not aware of. And then you can call me and say, oh, this is what your client is going through.
Sure, yeah, and the beauty of collaborative, in contrast to any of the other processes available for divorce, is that it inherently recognizes there are three key elements to every divorce. There's the legal, which of course that's your expertise. There's the financial, which typically, while I understand attorneys have some level of understanding or even perhaps some expertise in, but you're typically not a CPA, you're not an accountant. And that's the value of having the financial expert CPA involved.
Right.
And then, of course, with the psychologist or licensed clinical social worker, that we're expert in understanding, psychology and relationship dynamics and child development, and that's why I think we all play a critical role in helping couples have a far more reasonable, non-adversarial divorce.
Now, when the collaborative case is over, you don't continue in a therapeutic role with your clients, right?
No, it's very clear from an ethical perspective that you don't want to have a dual relationship with your clients. What can happen? So yeah, you would never go from being a divorce coach to being someone's therapist, or vice versa. You would never go from being someone's therapist to being their divorce coach.
Right.
What you can do, though, because oftentimes what we address in a parenting plan is how to handle impasse. So in other words, if there's an issue between the parents that they can't resolve, what do? And typically, they both want to stay out of court for obvious reasons. So many couples do put a paragraph in there saying that if we can't resolve a given issue, we will contact our divorce coach or coaches again to have at least, 1 or 2 sessions to address this together.
Right. And I love the fact that, we really do emphasize in a collaborative case, much more than in a litigation case, that, it is okay to come back, right? In court, I really don't want people coming back, right?
Sure.
It's like, please avoid court at all costs.
Yes.
But in a collaborative case, we do emphasize that kids get older, changes happen, they might, when they become a teenager, choose to go live with dad instead of mom. It's okay. I mean, they have medical issues that come up, and so I love the fact that we kind of leave it open for them to always come back to this process, which is much more civil than heading to court and having to duke it out over there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and with when we do a parenting plan with parents, we get into a great deal of granular detail. Because as you point out, you can't anticipate everything that's going to happen. Development is fluid, and you can't anticipate everything. But sometimes if we're working with very young children and understanding that children and families are going to change and evolve, particularly with much younger children, we may even sometimes put something in an agreement that we agree to come back in a year and discuss how things are going with a particular access schedule or timeshare arrangement between parents and look at potentially changing that. So if there's a primary custodial parent, the parent who doesn't have primary custody can have more time with the child. There's just a lot of different possibilities that can happen in those situations as well.
And you cover a lot more than what we can do in court. Like in court, we don't talk about dating. You're going to go date, that's your prerogative. I don't want to hear about it as a judge, right? But in those sessions, you do actually come up with dating protocols. So when you move on and you meet somebody else, how are you going to introduce this person, right? It's a much more forgiving process. Like you also, people don't realize this, but a lot of cases involve substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs. People do some really, unfortunate things around here to deal with stress. And, in court, I'm going to use it against them. In court, I'm going to say, oh, well, isn't it true you go through like a bottle of vodka a week? Isn't it true, right? That's what we do in court.
Yes.
And if I'm on the other side, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to say, no, he doesn't have a problem. You prove it. Prove that he has a problem. Right. And so these are the games we play. But in those parenting plan sessions that you go through, you're not using someone's addiction or their problems against them. You actually go through a process of trying to find solutions. Am I right?
Exactly, because we recognize, in what the long-term social science literature is very clear about, that children do better when they have healthy, warm bonds, connections with both parents. So even though, as you point out, Regina, if you're litigating a case, you're doing your best to, I don't know if disenfranchise is the right word, but to minimize the other parent's role and to kind of win the case for your client, because I understand that's what you're hired to do. But unfortunately, and again, it's not a slam on you or your colleagues, but that can be rather traumatic for the people involved, for their families, for the children's relationship with their parents. I mean, it's just not an ideal solution for how to dissolve a family. And then, of course, how do you move forward? Because, they're still kids, they're still minor children, you still have to co-parent. And after, expending a huge amount of resources on this litigated, nasty process, then you're expecting parents to co-parent in an effective, warm, loving, nurturing way with kids. I mean, it's
not going to happen.
Yeah, it
no,
really
if you throw mud at each other in court, there's going to be very little goodwill.
Exactly, and it casts a long shadow. There's pretty significant consequences to that. So what we really, and now while indeed there are some cases that are not amenable to a collaborative approach,
right.
There are some cases, extremes of domestic violence or mental illness, that you do need some more formal court process. But we do believe that at least most cases can resolve in some type of alternative dispute resolution, such as collaborative.
No, I totally agree. So given what we do every day, I have my own coping mechanisms to kind of, find something happy, whether it's like, spending time with my son, with my friends, or, doing the TV show once a week. That's, some of my positive outlets. So I understand that you recently wrote a children's book.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was the inspiration for that?
Well, the inspiration was it's a true story.
Okay.
We're a dog family. And the most senior dog is our pug, Wheezy, and essentially the story told itself. And I thought it would make a really cute, sweet, and even poignant story for kids. Because it's essentially a story about how Wheezy lost his... Wheezy's the name of the pug.
Right.
It's an odd name. But if you've ever heard a pug sleep and the noises he makes, it's a lot of wheezing going on. Uh-huh. But anyway, he had lost his eye, and I created a story around how he was able to bounce back from that, how he discovered his own resilience around that,
right.
And how he was able to really fully enjoy his life and family and world despite a setback.
No, it was a really cute book, and my son loved it. He's 9,
great.
and I read it to him, and I think it's a very powerful message, because we are going to all suffer setbacks, and sometimes how we recover from those is truly a transformative process.
Right, exactly. It's not whether you've been knocked down, because everybody has been knocked down. It's how you get up and how you deal with having been knocked down. And certainly kids can relate very nicely to cute little animals, and they can be less threatening in some ways than sometimes when it's other children. And the metaphor of what little Wheezy goes through,
right.
I think, can have send an important message to kids, and sometimes even a few adults told me they really enjoyed it as well.
Well, this has been great. If someone wanted to contact you for further information, how would they do that?
Oh, well, thanks for asking, Regina. So I have a website, suburbanpsychology.com,
okay.
And I have offices both here in Rockville and up in Howard County. And they can contact me through my website or through my phone number. 301-785-8644 is my local Montgomery County number.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Regina. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Making It Last.